In the history of the United States, or more specifically Chicago, none other event changed the course of history than what historians describe as the greatest public works project in history. The construction of expressways in Chicago in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s changed the way citizens traveled to a point where people still use these highways every day. Expressways are in fact the greatest turning point in Chicago's history. The principal expressways of Chicago are the Dan Ryan, Kennedy, and its offshoot, the Edens, the Eisenhower, and the Stevenson Expressways. The genesis of the U.S. interstate is rooted in one man, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. After the end of World War I, he assembled a convoy to travel from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. Eisenhower was mesmerized by the dilapidated arterial highways that connected east from west. During World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower was still thinking about the interstates as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, where he was given a tour of the Nazi Germany's Autobahn system. Eisenhower found that the Nazi system of travel and transport was that final fuse that ignited the inspiration to fund an interstate highway system as automobile ownership became more and more common across the country. Eisenhower, a strong proponent of automobile travel, is pictured at the wheel of a Willys GP in 1942. Ike, elected as President of the United States in 1952, pushed for the system, citing the 1919 convoy and the Autobahn. In 1956, he persuaded Congress to enact the Federal Aid Highway Act, otherwise known as the birthday of the American Expressway. President Eisenhower is quoted as saying, "The old convoy had me started thinking about good two-lane highways," he wrote years later in his autobiography, At Ease. But Germany had made me see the wisdom of broader ribbons across the land. Interstates were viewed as another step towards the far-fetched future the 1950s so lovingly depicted. Families traveling at rapid speeds down incredible highways in their atomic-powered cars were thought to be so close, but even today that is still not a reality. In 1949, ground was broken on the William G. Edens Expressway, then Superhighway. The expressway was the first in Chicago and was planned to start at Avondale and Cicero, leading up to a terminus at the Lake Cook border, pictured as a work crew gathered in a drainage tunnel. The superhighway was named for William G. Edens, a Chicago banker who was a strong advocate for paved roads. He sponsored Illinois' first highway grant in 1980. An important key in the expressway's notoriety as a turning point was how the Edens had a significant impact on the suburban expansion, giving a population boom to the towns of Skokie and Niles, Illinois. Note the Edens Superhighway sign above the viaduct for the Cicero Avenue Bridge. When interstates were built, they ran through farmland and prairies that were perfectly eligible for expansions into villages, subdivisions, and general communities for the modern family. As time went on, more and more expressways popped up in the Chicagoland area. Many of these expressways would not be possible without Daniel B. Ryan, Jr. Ryan was an insurance broker and the president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners from 1954 to 1961. Ryan was strongly involved in Chicago's machine politics, which gave him a strong hand in the construction of superhighways. Especially with the passing of the Federal Highway Act, Dan Ryan found himself a crutch to stand his dream on. Not all of the effects that expressways had were positive. Over 60 miles of homes, apartments, and businesses were demolished along thoroughfares such as Avondale Avenue, Congress Parkway, and Wentworth Avenue to make way for highways. Today, respectively, these make up the Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Dan Ryan Expressways. Pictured as the demolished Congress Parkway, now Eisenhower Expressway. Note the multiple-mile thoroughfare that stretches from the old post office to Chicago's Austin neighborhood. This thoroughfare for the Northwest Expressway, now Kennedy, was under scrutiny since the 1920s when it was proposed due to the large amount of home demolition along Avondale. The Edens was less controversial since the land it went through was, at the time, not populated. But to expand into Chicago's heart, there had to be sacrifices. The construction of toll roads were also seen in Chicago, predominantly in low-population areas. Tri-State, East-West, and Northwest tollways began in 1956 and all opened in 1958. To connect Chicago with the new Indiana Toll Road, the Chicago, originally Calumet Skyway, opened in 1958. These toll roads still survive today, as they are a high-revenue way of small communities to gain funding. In the late 1950s, ground was broken on a southern expressway along Wentworth Avenue. It was long unnamed, but after Dan Ryan's untimely death in 1961, he became the namesake. The Dan Ryan connects the Skyway to the downtown area, as well as connecting the Bishop Ford Freeway, which was built in 1950. The effect the Dan Ryan Expressway had in Chicago's history is the worst of all the changes made in Chicago's history. It fueled northern segregation. Mike Royko's biography on former Mayor Richard J. Daley, Boss, makes the claim that the Dan Ryan was planned to reinforce the border between Daley's neighborhood Bridgeport, a predominantly white neighborhood at that time, and the Black Belt along State Street to the east. The Black Belt was an area on the south side where a number of post-Great Migration families were isolated up to the 1970s. A series of Black Belt row apartments are pictured here in 1949, depicting an impoverished community with litter strewn across the ground. Along the Dan Ryan was land the Chicago Housing Authority found ripe for the construction of a new housing project. The number of housing projects across Chicago are worth noting as their own turning point, their effects being positive, tax-exempt low-income homes for Chicago's lower class, and negative, a high crime and murder rate so terrible that the danger of the projects is still legendary today. The Robert Rochon Taylor homes, the last building left, pictured in 2005, were constructed along the Dan Ryan from Pershing Road, 39th Street, down to 54th Street. It was composed of 28 high-rise buildings with 16 stories each, with a total of 4,415 units, mostly arranged in U-shaped groups of 3. Another factor in the expressways being a turning point in Chicago's history, and the reason why they're still used to this day, is the effect that expressways had on transportation. Hundreds upon thousands of people ride these highways like the yellow brick road to the Emerald City of Chicago. People can make the commute to work, to the airports, etc. on the interstate, and here, the Circle Interchange, is the nucleus of the asphalt atom, its electron cloud radiating from it in all directions of the city. Goods are transported on these roads, keeping our city and our country running like a well-oiled machine. Not just cars travel these roads, but tractor-trailers and trucks, too, supplying food, clothes, and other things to our fair city, without days, even months of small road travel to get things to us. Expressways also affected small distance travel, and it's travel that doesn't even involve cars or trucks. The thoroughfares made by expressways gave an opportunity for rapid transit tracks to run in the medians of some of Chicago's largest expressways. The following routes fall along the interstates. The Congress branch of the Blue Line, the first intermedian track in Chicago. Second came the Dan Ryan Line, now southern end of the Red Line. Next came the Kennedy Line, an extension of the Milwaukee Elevated, now northern branch of the Blue Line. Last came the Midway branch, now Orange Line. This line is an exception as it is not intermedian, but runs alongside the Stevenson Expressway at the ground level. The CTA can remember the expressways as a turning point, as they brought more revenue to their transportation system that was slowly becoming less successful with more people owning automobiles. The more accessible the L became, the more they became profitable again. The impact expressways had on Chicago were an extremely strong one. This turning point was the most important factor in the modernization of the city of Chicago and the nation abroad. People still use these roads every day for work, transport and shipping, and for leisurely travel, as they can cross town in a matter of 15 minutes and with express lanes, even less. So next time you ride on the expressway, think of the sacrifice, the blood and sweat, and the political work that made these ramps, roads, and bridges possible. Next time you think of as the incredible turning point in Chicago's history, think of good old Ike and his once impossible dream.